Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I'm also the host of Moms Don't Have Time to Lose Weight, and I'm the editor of the anthology, which you should run out and buy, called Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. All proceeds of that book go to COVID-19 vaccine research. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Moms Don't Have Time to Write, a new publication on Medium, and we're accepting submissions, so please send your personal essays there. And if all that isn't enough, you can follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and my website is zibbyowens.com. Okay, now back to this amazing podcast. Listeners, if you enjoy this podcast, I promise you will love my new audiobook for Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. It's not about the quarantine, but a lot of the essays were written during that time about other things that moms don't have time to do or other busy people, things like reading, eating, working out, breathing, having sex, and 60 best-selling and notable authors wrote essays. All those authors have been on this very podcast. So if you like to listen to my conversations, if you want to get to know these authors better, I read the audiobook myself. Check it out on Audible, Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. Again, Audible audiobook. Go listen to it. It's like 60 mini podcasts. I hope you enjoy. Special announcement. I am teaming up with Katie Couric Media's Wake Up Call and Random House to give away 100 copies of the book Stranger Care by Sarah Santilles. I'm really excited about this. Here's a little about Sarah's book, and we collectively are giving away 100 copies. After their decision not to have a biological child, Sarah Santilles and her husband Eric decide to adopt via the foster care system. Despite knowing that the system's goal is the child's reunification with the birth family, Sarah opens their home to a flurry of social workers who question them, evaluate them, and ultimately prepare them to welcome a child into their lives, even if it means most likely having to give the child back. Stranger Care is an illuminating read, and Sarah will be on this podcast soon. So, if you would like to enter for a chance to win, please go to the link in the episode description from right where you clicked on it and enter your email address, first and last name. By doing so, you're agreeing to the sweepstakes official rules and agree to receive communications and special offers from Katie Couric's Wake Up Call and Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thank you for doing it, and enter to win today. Just go back to the episode description. Thanks again. Miranda Cowley Heller is the author of The Paper Palace. Miranda has worked as senior vice president and head of drama series at HBO, developing and overseeing such shows as The Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, The Wire, Deadwood, and Big Love, among others. This is her first novel. She grew up spending summers on Cape Cod and now lives in California. Welcome, Miranda. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to talk about The Paper Palace.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
I'm thrilled to be here. So, yeah.
Oh, I know I was just telling you this, but I am like completely obsessed with your book. It's the best fiction, best novel I've read in a while. It's so good. I could not put it down. I recommended it as soon as I could to like everybody I knew on Instagram and in my personal life and everywhere else. And I'm like, this is the book. Anyway, I'm just so excited about it and so thrilled to get to talk to you about it.
I am too. And I love that. And thank you. And it's, I was just saying a second ago that, you write this thing in a complete bubble. I mean, first novel. So you write it in a complete bubble and then suddenly it's out there in the world. And so of course it's incredibly exciting to be, that somebody likes it and loves it or whatever. So
first, can you start out by telling everybody what the book is about?
The book is about a woman named Elle Bishop, who's 50. She has 3 children. She's very happily married. And at the beginning of the book, Elle wakes up to realize she's done something rather extreme the night before. She has had sex outside a dinner party with her oldest and best friend, Jonas, the man she always thought she was going to marry. And while her husband and his wife and her mother were all inside at the dinner. And in the next 24 hours, she's going to have to decide between the life that she has made with her wonderful husband, Peter, or the life she always dreamed about and probably would have lived if something terrible hadn't happened in her youth. And the story takes place on Cape Cod in the backwoods near Wellfleet. And I think when most people think of the Cape, they sort of imagine almost more like Newport or the Kennedy compound with these grassy lawns going down to sailboats and calm harbors or whatever. But the outer Cape, I don't know if you've been there, is really wild. The further out you go, the more it's sort of national seashore. It's forests that go straight to the top of cliff dunes, and it's you can really get lost in the woods. It's that kind of a place, and sandy roads. And I grew up spending every summer there. And so in any event, Elle has 24 hours to make this incredibly impossible decision. But the story is also told in 50 years of her life, in sort of glimpses that add up to the moment, that take us to the moment that's brought her to this precipice. And to understand why, after whatever it is, something like 40 years of friendship and never going there, why now? So there's this sort of emotional mystery that runs through it. It's a sort of a why done it instead of a who done it. And and I think it's really about, it's not so much about these two men, it's really about this woman and this woman's life and finding herself.
Nice job. I hate that I put everybody on the spot, but I do think it's important for people to know, what the general gist is. But there's like so much more. It's like divorce and marriage in New York City and Cape Cod and family and parents and step-parents and family and trauma. And there's so much. You have like everything you could hit. Mother, like being a mother, dealing with your mother, like mother-in-laws. Like there's like nothing you didn't hit in this book that like a woman could not relate to, essentially. Not just women, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that there's, you don't write a book hopefully with a theme in mind. You have an interest and then it sort of emerges. But if there is something in there, a sort of continuum, Elle comes from a family of divorce. Her mother comes from a family of divorce. There's a line in the book that says, in my family, divorce is just a 7-letter word that could easily be exchanged with too bad or I'm bored. And so, and her mother, who was called Wallace, was a formidable figure. At one point, she just sort of says, divorce is good for children. But in fact, there's a little bit of a Grimm's fairy tale aspect to this life. And as you say, there's her relationship with her mother's relationship to her mother before, Elle's relation to her daughter and to her sister. All of these things are affected in kind of a domino effect by the past generations, but also by divorce and by what happens when your family splits up, and in a way, that's why I think I said it on the Cape, because that place is so important to me. That's where I find myself at home in my, as a child of divorce. And so the place that grounds her and shapes her life is this, summer place. And because it's the one constant every year of her life.
I feel like I have the same attachment, and I am a child of divorce, and my grandparents were divorced, and I got divorced. And now I feel really bad for whichever kids of mine end up getting divorced. That said, the second husbands of all three are really awesome guys. So, there's a perk. But I do feel like when things shift, you rely more on physical place. So much so that I've been coming to the same place, out here on Long Island. And when one store closes that's been there forever, I'm deeply wounded by it. How can this change? I rely on this,
Oh, where's the newspaper shop?
Exactly.
Where's the the penny candy store?
Exactly. Now it's all decrepit and I'm this is so sad. But anyway, so how did you tell me about this whole thing? I know. So you used to work as head of drama at HBO or something.
I did for a while. I mean, that's sort of not an ancient history chapter, but that was a while ago.
You tell me where. I only read from your bio, trying to figure out how we got here to you writing this amazing
writing this book.
So take me back. When did this whole writing thing start, and how did we get here, and why this plot?
Right. So I was always a novelist in my mind, sort of starting at the age of 7 or 10. And I wrote poetry when I was, that was my path. I come from a family of writers and book editors and grew up in that soup. And, there was a lot of pressure. You have to get your name in print. You have to do this. You have to do that, coming from my grandfather mostly. And that was my, major in college. That was when I came out. My first proper job after being an assistant, I was the associate fiction and books editor at Cosmopolitan magazine. And then I left that job because I fell in love and moved to Italy. But there I was writing articles and travel pieces and this was what I thought was my path. And I did some ghostwriting and I was a book doctor for various New York agents. But when I tried to write something, it was just, frankly, bad, I think. I mean, I couldn't access, I was so in my own way. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Because of the family, because of, my husband's sister is a successful novelist as well. Like, there's just all this stuff. And I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist at all. I'm a very imperfectionist. However, I just was like frozen because I thought I can never write something unless it's really good. I refused to be humiliated in public. And so all that pressure finally led me to just say, I just sort of put it aside, I guess, for a very long time.
Who is your husband's sister, by the way?
Zoe Heller,
okay.
British novelist. Yeah. And, my cousin's father, divorced from my aunt, but is Martin Amis. So there's, this pressure.
Got it.
And pride.
Good. Yeah.
Fine. So, okay. So cut to eventually, my husband's British. I get a job in LA by some miracle, working at the new drama department at HBO with absolutely no experience, but a long series of miracles, basically. And I worked there for 10 years. We built a drama series department. My boss, Carolyn Strauss, who's amazing, she was already running comedy that had been established, and all these specials and all that stuff. So this was, and then somebody else ran miniseries, but so this was this new thing. And the first show we did was The Sopranos. So that was like, and so I did that, 6 Feet Under, The Wire, Deadwood, et cetera, which was amazing. And it's funny because people always say, oh, did you bring your experience as a TV person to writing a book? And I would say like it was the exact opposite. I brought my experience as a literature or writing person or reading of literature, person to HBO, to my job at HBO, and I think that was part of the fun, was just like finding voices that felt, and creating sort of writers who could create big stories, right? And then I quit after that period of time and sort of bumped around, and I started this book, and I started about 2 or 3 other books, and then put them away. Again, I just was I couldn't find it. Very briefly, then I went back to UCLA to get a art history degree. But in any event, very briefly, this was the one thing I just couldn't accomplish. And after I was going to go to grad school, and then my husband's show was going to be set in New York. So therefore, I had to say no to LA. And then I applied to New York, and then they changed the show back to LA.
Oh my gosh.
Year where I was going, what am I going to do with this 1 year? And one of my best friends, Libby, said, we were on a hike, and she just said, well, why don't you just take this as the 1 year to commit to writing? If you don't do it, never talk about it again. And I was like, okay. And I pulled this project out of the drawer. And at the same time, I took this class, this amazing class with this guy called Jack Grapes. He's sort of a writing teacher genius, not fiction or anything like that, but it's called method writing, sort of like method acting. And what he undoes everything you've ever learned about anything, structure anything, and he makes you write very badly for a long time, and then apply different, voices to sort of boring writing, to journaling or whatever. And so I got pulled apart, and that was great for me as a writer. And then I started writing in his class. It sort of progresses, and I started writing a lot of poetry, and I got some poetry published. And that is when something about that, the poetry is what broke me open finally to be able to write this book. And so I went back and I found I did a class a sort of novel 5 class at UCLA with this amazing guy, Mark Sarvis, who's a novelist. I don't know if you know his work, but he's my mentor, I would say. And I just wrote this book slowly but surely. So there were huge gaps in time. I started it, and then there were years in between. But somehow writing poetry, I think, got me out of this like frontal lobe space, and allowed me to just and also I just decided when I started writing it, no one will ever read this. I'm not going to tell anybody I'm doing it. I can say anything because no one's ever going to read it. So that gave me this sort of freedom of I'm just doing this. Yeah.
I tried to start writing this memoir I'm working on, and I was so just frozen that finally in all caps, I was like, no one will see this, not the real draft, only for you. Do you know what I mean?
No, I mean, that's exactly what I had to do too, because I think those of us who really can get caught up in that, I mean, it just took me so many years to get out of my own way. And I knew it was in there for this very strange reason, because of the way I always had these huge, massive dreams where I would dream paintings and dream, entire architectural cities and sort of, Game of Thrones-esque things and statues and art and blah. And so I knew it was in there. I just couldn't get to it somehow. And in my mind, I always had this vision of that my head was divided by this plate, and I had to somehow scale it and leap over to the back and finally manage to and go down and, get that writing stuff back, that I knew was there.
Oh my gosh. So when you were thinking about this project, which part of the plot did you know all along, or maybe none of it? None.
All I knew was that I was, that I wanted to write. I mean, I knew none. I wrote, as they say, I wrote the whole thing into the dark. I didn't know anything that was going to happen from one day to the next. And that's what poetry taught me, by the way, to love the blank page. Whenever I have a task for writing, it's the blank. I'll go away from the book if, when my editor said, well, I want more of this, or I have to open a blank page and not know what it's going to say. That's it. I have to take it completely away. And I do think that's sort of, you find lyricism in some strange way. And I know a lot of people, I used to be terrified of the blank page. And now it's my most comforting thing,
Wow. And so all of it just unfolded as you went? Then did you have to, I mean, you must have then gone back because there's all this.
Yeah. I mean, I went back, but I knew what it was about.
Okay.
So, right. I mean, in my mind, what interested me. So when I was very young and naive, but maybe not, I became mildly obsessed with this John Lennon quote, life is what happens when you're making other plans, I think it was. And, I cut it out and I put it on the wall of my bedroom thing, put it in taped it like you do with the thing, in my journals. And there was just this one point in my life when I went back and looked at all these journals and I realized, as an adult, I was still doing the exact same thing. I was living this life in my head that I was imagining, but kind of ignoring my entire life that I was living, or just sort of letting it all pass by. And so I was very interested in creating a character, a structure around a character that mirrored that and sort of investigated that, where, so the 50 years is the life, represents in that sense, the life that Elle has actually led. And then the 24 hours is the chance to live the life that's been in her head, the fantasy that she's held. And so that was all I knew, just those two pieces to create, to show a life in 24 hours and a life in 50 years. It's not flashbacks. They're not flashbacks. It's two separate stories of the same woman. And they meet time-wise just before, sort of at the precipice, the night before she does the thing she does. Let's put it that way, And so you understand, I hope, you learn who she is and why she's here. And then also, I'm also very interested in it's sort of an obvious word, but choices, right? How the smallest thing, can completely derail you or make your life. And it's just the tiny randomness of that, the choices that we inherit as well, from our parents or grandparents, their love lives, how their love lives, end up, shaping who we are too. And so with Elle, I just love the idea of a character, a woman who has to make a choice between one incredible love and another equally incredible love. Both men are amazing. There's no way to choose. But what do you do if you have to make a choice? Your life depends on it, but there's no good answer you can find. So she's sort of on this emotional tightrope between two skyscrapers, let's say, and she's going to fall if she doesn't go one way or the other. But what do how do you make that choice? And so it just raised questions. And I think that's more how I followed the story, if that makes sense. It raised the question for me of, can you actually live a life filled with regrets? Who do I want to be true to in the end? This is a woman in her 50s. So she's at a very different stage of life. And I thought that was also interesting. I don't think there are a lot of novels where there's a sort of sexy woman in her 50s.
Seriously, this woman is like, she's like so getting busy with all, she's like, it's amazing. The scene in with the tent in the sand, I was like, oof. Like that was like, there was some heavy stuff going on. And by the way, not just with her, but even like I was really struck by how great a need for like sex, honestly, all the women in the book really have and explain and enjoy it. Right. There's nothing shameful in this book. This is like, I think about, and I'm forgetting Dixon and his girlfriend just sort of like parading around naked around them. And like, the grandmother, like begging her husband for sex and like it always going on around them. Like also in, obviously in all different shapes and forms, some healthy, some blatantly horrific, but like at the core, I feel like is this like embracing of women's sexuality forever. And it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I think these are powerhouses of women. Even the women who are weak or who do terrible things are really strong women. Mm-hmm. Women who have all gone through some sort of trauma, which I think, almost everybody unfortunately goes through some form of trauma in their life. And they've sort of had to put away childish things, as it were, and in the case of Wallace, what her mother did, even going back to, the grandmother, Nanette, she was this wealthy woman whose family lost everything in the crash. And suddenly she's sort of their currency. They want to sort of sell her. And, at the same time, she's completely beholden to the man, which in that way, the husband, because she can't survive on her own. And that's a whole generation of the past that sort of weirdly reminded me of Jane Austen novels, which I love. That thing of the women who can't, it's hard for us to imagine entirely that, but it's a truth. And what I wanted was then to see, who would, if the Nanette hadn't been that person and Wallace hadn't had the life she had, would she have been a different person? And would Elle have, gone to her mother more with her, would they have been closer? All of these, what I wanted was, I think, to see how you can survive flaws and you can still be strong and you can make mistakes. And I didn't want to judge anybody. I just wanted to make the women real. That's it,
Wow. Well, there were so many different people who like came and went in the book, and everybody who sort of entered stage left was like, you could see them, you could smell and feel, and like all those things they tell you to do to like create a scene and like get people in the scene. Like you did all those things, you know what I mean? Like it all made it just even. And I noticed like you didn't even say that much sometimes, like even where you ended your chapters and where you stopped describing things. I've heard somebody on the podcast was talking about like, like don't underestimate the reader. Like the reader can figure it out. Like you don't need to give 4 extra sentences when they walk out of the room. You don't have to then see them close the door. You get it. Or so, you know what I mean? And I feel like you are like, that's exactly what you're doing. Like so often it's just a line or two, but it conjures up entire experiences.
Well, I think, there's, in life, what interests me are the sort of the silences in between. What the unsaid is just as resonant, right, as said. And so, and I think also my father, when I was very small, I brought him my first essay or whatever about the osprey or something, and I was so excited. And I was at Nightingale at the time, I think. And anyway, I was probably 10 and, my parents were already divorced. And he read the first paragraph or whatever of this thing, and he went, starts, like literally scratching stuff out. And he goes, you just need to know that the way to write, it's always the shortest distance between 2 points, Miranda. It's like, so of course I'm traumatized, but ultimately, like, best lesson ever. You know what I mean? So
wow.
I think that's, and it's the same thing with sort of high-low of, sort of bumping up, something funny with something horrible, or, that like a dirty sock can have as much meaning in a weird way as, a wedding. It depends what it represents to the character. It's not, everybody's triggered by different things. And, writers, I just love a lot of the writers who leave those spaces for us.
Amazing. Okay. Well, I know we're like almost out of time, and I could talk to you forever. I feel like I have 1,000 other questions, because I feel like these characters are actually real. And I already started I was like, oh, the character in my book I'm reading, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these are not real people. Like, you have to stop. Like, you can't share anecdotes. Anyway. Okay. Is this going to be a movie? Has it already been optioned? A. B. What advice would you have for aspiring authors? Although you've given a lot already. And then what are you going to do next? Those are my questions.
Well, it was bought by HBO, actually, as a miniseries, although just in my own defense, there was an auction for it. It wasn't a gimme. And I'm writing, I just turned in a new draft of the pilot, executive produce and write it with my partner, Lynette Howell-Taylor, hopefully, if they like it. And so that's what I'm working, so that's A and C. That's what I'm doing right now, but I'm very anxious then to get back to, writing another novel. That's sort of where my heart is. But at the same time, dialogue is so much fun and so much fun to write, I mean, and I guess in terms of writers or, writers who are having difficulty or aspiring or starting, don't do what I did. For one thing. I would say what I learned is that there's no such thing as a real writer. In my mind, I kept thinking like, so-and-so is a real writer. I'm not a real writer. And so, because I don't know what I'm going to write tomorrow. I haven't made an outline. I haven't, I've never studied form or structure. I was like, and it doesn't matter, whether you have, ass and chair, or whether you go from like 6 a.m. to 12 every day, or what I wrote this when I had time, sort of, between doing, and then suddenly it was something. And so then it gathers momentum. But, the other tiny piece of advice, or huge, is that a friend of mine who's a novelist said, when I was going, oh God, it's so awful, it's taking so many years. And she said, when I was writing my first book, everybody kept saying, oh yeah, your novel, I had that feeling too, like, oh yeah, you're writing a novel, people do it, like, when is it going to be finished? And and she said the pressure was on her so much because she'd taken so long and she wanted to prove something, that when she went and got her first copy of the book, basically, or whatever, she realized it was completely not cooked. And she said to me, do not rush, because guess what? No one is waiting for this. Nobody cares. Just make it yours. And so I think that's really important too. There are no rules. You can, like, I write, Il Doctoro quote, I'm sure but, what does he say? He says writing for him was like driving in the fog at night. You can only see as far as your headlights can show, but you still can make the entire journey. And that's how I made the journey. And somebody else might have a completely other way. Just get out of your way and get out of your head,
I should just post that somewhere. That applies to everything. I mean,
for everything. And P.S. if I could do it, I know I shouldn't eat that brownie.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then
So, now you can come on Moms Don't Have Time to Lose Weight. We can start talking about that.
Moms don't have time to, exactly. Moms don't have time to write papers for their kids. Yeah. Why are you asking me to do this again?
I know. I just relearned all of American history this year. I was like, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Awesome. Well, Miranda, thank you. I'm so excited about your book. I'm so excited to see like what happens with it as it's launched into the world. I can't wait for other people to read it and just like get as excited as I did. And anyway, just really awesome. So congratulations.
Well, thank you so much. It actually does mean the world. It really does. And fingers crossed. I mean, it comes out on Tuesday. So here, and then Thursday in England. And, so.
Hold on. Buckle your seatbelt.
And cross all your fingers.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
It's really, really nice to meet you.
You too. All right.
Have fun.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.